Okay, we're good to go? Yes. Excellent. Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to this event on PFAS pesticides and the impact of TFA on Europe's waterways, organised by the Pesticide Action Network Europe and kindly hosted by not one but two MEPs. So, a very big thank you to Cristina Guarda from the Greens and Sigrid Friis from Renew. So let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Natasha Foote. I'm an agri-food journalist based here in Brussels. I work on all things EU agri-food policy. I have the pleasure of moderating and guiding the discussion over the course of today's event. So, as I said, today we're here to discuss PFAS pesticides, which degrade into a particularly problematic product. That's the trifluoroacetic acid. Can you tell that I practiced that before? Which you will hear referenced a lot in this event as it's become a major but very overlooked contaminant in Europe's water sources. So there is a growing body of evidence suggesting that this very tiny substance is having a huge impact on our waterways. And so this event is part of efforts to shine some light on this. It's also quite timely as it comes just as EU member states have agreed to ban one PFAS pesticide. We'll talk about this a bit later on. But there is also a push from members of the European Parliament, spearheaded by our hosts of today's event, to go one step further and see a complete ban on PFAS pesticides. So we'll dig into all of this today. I'll just quickly give you an overview of what to expect. So we have a nice packed agenda full of expert speakers. We'll firstly hear a number of opening remarks, a couple of keynote presentations, followed by a panel discussion. But then afterwards, there will be the opportunity for you to put your questions to our panelists, have a bit of discussion about this. So if you have burning questions, keep hold of them. We'll come back to it. And that's enough for me. Now, let me pass you now to Sigrid for her opening remarks.
Thank you. Let's see. Can you hear me if I stand like this? Because I really wanted to see and have a look at the nice room full of people. Thank you so much for being here today with me and with my colleague Cristina Guarda from Italy in the Green Group. It's really encouraging to see such a group of people from political parties, from the institutions, from organizations, and from businesses coming together to address one of the, if you ask me, one of the most urgent environmental and health crises of our time, which is, of course, the PFAS pesticides and the TFA contamination in Europe's water sources. Last year, in my home country, Denmark, we set quite a disturbing record. Hazardous toxins coming from the agricultural sector mainly were found in drinking water extractions at a historical and alarming level. Pesticide residues were found in more than 55% of the tested wells, and in nearly 1 in 7, those residues exceeded the legal limits. But our drinking water is one of the most precious resources we have, and yet these figures forecast a future where water contamination becomes the norm rather than the exception. That's not an acceptable future, if you ask me. Many of the pesticides that are used in agriculture today contain PFAS, known as forever chemicals. These substances break down to TFA, an exceptionally persistent and harmful compound now detected in alarming amounts in drinking water all across Europe. With all of these alarming discoveries, has the use of PFAS pesticides been reduced? No. In the agriculture sector, it has gone rapidly up. The use of PFAS pesticides in this sector is 4 times higher now than it was 10 years ago. That's not acceptable. We have studies to show that TFA threatens our planetary boundaries and poses severe risk to our health. We have scientists warning us that these chemicals can reduce fertility, interfere with fetal development, and have long-term effects on human health. PFAS and TFA have been found in human blood, including in pregnant women, even in umbilical cords. It means that these toxic substances are already reaching the most vulnerable, our unborn children. In just 2 months, I myself will be giving birth to my second daughter, and standing here today, it's difficult not to think about the chemicals that I'm exposed to every single day. Chemicals that I cannot see, I cannot taste, I cannot smell them, but they are nonetheless making their way into my body and into hers. So, what is this doing to her before she's even born? And what kind of world are we leaving for her to inherit? The air she will breathe, the food she will eat, or more critically, the water she will drink. That worries me, that upsets me, and it also makes me angry. Angry that as policymakers, we are still allowing these toxic substances to spread across our fields, into our rivers, into our drinking water, and ultimately into our own bodies. I believe that there is a non-negotiable responsibility to prevent this from happening, and that right now we are failing that responsibility. Clean water should be a right, but it's a right we must fight for. That's why my colleague Christina and I have organized this event today to raise awareness about this crisis and to demand real action from inside of this house. We want to push for a ban on PFAS pesticides in the EU, to stronger monitoring of TFA contamination, and a genuine and unwavering commitment to protect the generations to come. So, with those opening remarks, I just want to welcome you and say that the time for waiting is over and the time for action is now. I'm looking forward to share the next couple of hours with you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And I would now like to pass the floor now to my left to Angeliki. So Dr. Angeliki Lysimacau? No, didn't practice that. No. Okay. Who's head of science and policy at Pan Europe, also for some opening remarks.
Yes, thank you. So good afternoon from my side too, and welcome. I want a big thank you to MEP Sigrid Friis and Cristina Guarda for hosting this event, this very important event today. Also to the speakers that they're going to share their expertise, and my colleague Salome Ronel, for making this event happen, and of course to all of you for being here today. So we're here to discuss a crisis, a pollution crisis that we've never seen before. This is of PFAS chemicals, but particularly today of PFAS pesticides and TFA, as we heard. And what's concerning when it comes to pesticides is that EU has already in place a very strict law that says that when a pesticide is shown to cause harm to humans, animals, or the environment, it must be banned. Yet, PFAS pesticides are still used today, and we are finding them. We have actually found that they have tripled as residues in our food in the last decade. So something has gone wrong. Currently, we have about 32 PFAS pesticides that they're authorized, and they're still used. And yes, and when we discussed, when we looked in detail, we found that many of them, almost all, they degrade to TFA. And afterwards, with our members, we decided to collect water samples across Europe, and we detected them everywhere. We detected them in surface waters, in tap water, but also in most of the mineral water. So we're all drinking TFA. And this is why we are here today. We will hear from our experts why TFA is a serious problem. We are also going to hear from EFSA, European Food Safety Authority, what Europe is doing currently to regulate PFAS pesticides and TFA. We will hear also from water companies that they want to ensure that the drinking water we're drinking is safe. And of course, we're going to hear why we need urgent action to ban PFAS pesticides and move towards more sustainable agriculture models. We should have acted yesterday, but today we can still make a change. So without further delay, I would like to give the floor to our keynote speakers. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, no time like the present, as they say. So yes, I'd like to now pass the floor to our first keynote speaker of today's event, and that is Professor Hans-Peter Arp, who is an environmental chemist who has a professorship at NTNU in Trondheim in Norway, also a technical expert at the Norwegian Geopolitical Institute, NGI, in Oslo in Norway. He leads a large Horizon 2020 project, Zero PM, with a very special focus on zero pollution of TFA, PFAS, and other persistent substances. So I pass you the floor.
Oh, thank you very much for that nice introduction. Just so I know how I'm going to click through slides, is there do I just give a signal? All right. Okay. No, but great. And I'm very happy to talk about this urgent issue. And so without further ado, I just want to talk by presenting some important data, but maybe I can see the first slide. I'll be walking first through the increasing sources of TFA so that you all can get an overview of how much TFA you're getting exposed to. And then I'll move on to why this is a concern, the irreversible effects from this accumulating pollution. And then I just want to talk about some solutions to a global threat, which I hope we can talk about today. So the next slide, please. So first, we have to understand that TFA has been accumulating in every environmental compartment rapidly, especially since the 1990s. We're here to talk about PFAS pesticides, but there's other sources. I would say TFA chemistry in general has taken off since the 1990s. So this first chart is showing an increase in ice core concentrations from the Arctic, and this is unprecedented compared to any other PFAS. It is accumulating on its own curve. And TFA has some very special properties because it's so persistent and mobile. Could I go to the next chart, please? So this is a study that was showing the accumulation over time in tree leaves and pine needles in Germany. It is so mobile that it can go up the phlegm of any plant on the farmer's field in the forest and accumulate right inside the needles. And the next slide, referring to our host Sigrid's country of Germany, Denmark, sorry. This was that survey that was done of the Danish groundwater wells, which found TFA was in the vast majority of them. And using methods, we can actually date the age of that groundwater. And we find there again that the TFA is accumulating over time. In some areas more than others, likely due to PFAS pesticides. Next slide, please. Now, it's just not that. It's just not in the nature. It's in everything we drink. So we can also look at some data here on TFA concentrations in wine, which is also increasing rapidly. And the concentrations, you might notice, can get quite high. 300 micrograms per liter is one of the maximum concentrations, but even the lowest concentrations, even the organic wine, can be quite high at 9 micrograms per liter. So pretty much if you want to avoid TFA anything you drink, you have to find yourself some old wine or some old groundwater wells. And so let's just go on. There's other things that we drink that have very high concentration. Now we should benchmark that to the concentration in drinking water because that's what we're talking about. So Germany has a relatively high average concentration of TFA at 1.5 micrograms per liter. I want you to remember that number. I think this is a good benchmark, 1.5 micrograms per liter. This is more than other countries. They're about 0.23 micrograms per liter, but you can see that they'll probably increase. Now let's compare that to other beverages we drink, because it might not be that in our drinking water that we have the highest concentrations. We have higher concentrations just like in the wine, in the beer, in our tea, in our juice. And that is because the TFA is accumulating in the edible parts. So we still don't really know how much TFA we're getting in our plant-based diets, in our salads. Next slide, please. And so what we did, we wanted to look at, try to see what kind of media we could and see where TFA is increasing. And it was really hard to get some old data. There was some interest in TFA briefly in relation to the Montreal Protocol because they knew some of the replacements to chlorofluorocarbons introduced in the Montreal Protocol would make TFA. So we have some preliminary data. But based on those time series, everything that we have measured since, that is in the red bars and the early data is in the green bars, that both the median and the maximum concentration has been increasing. That's soil, that's sludge, that's dust, that's everything we can measure. But I want to talk about one media particularly that's important. Next, please. And that's blood, right? We don't have much data on blood, and that's unfortunate. But we have two studies, one in China and one in America, showing concentrations of 8.5 micrograms per liter. So the concentration in our blood is higher than the concentration in the water we're drinking. But I think we always have to ask ourselves when we see these trends of TFA increasing, and without discussions like this, there's be no motivation to stop it. What is the future concentration that we will be satisfied with of the human race having TFA in their blood? And we're talking globally. This is going to be an intergenerational issue, like centuries. Next slide, please. And I first want to put one thing issue to rest, because again, in relation to the Montreal Protocol, there was some claims that are still being circulated in the UNEP documents related to the Montreal Protocol that TFA has a natural origin. The basis for that was that they found some TFA in deep sea water samples, and they said these water samples were so old they have to be produced by underwater thermal vents. But this theory is no longer supported. You still find some people pushing it, especially in relation to the Montreal Protocol. But we know that there's different ways for things like TFA to get there. For instance, you might have heard that there's microplastics in the deep sea. They get there through thermal currents that run in the deep sea. TFA is transported in the same way. We know of other mechanisms, such as the sinking of dense water off of continental shelves that's sinking, and also marine snow. This is just algae that takes particles from the surface and deposits down. So there's many ways that TFA could be there, and we see all the other POPs, all the other PFAS are also in the deep sea. So this is really a hypothesis that TFA is any natural origin. There's no mechanistic proof. It should be put to rest and no longer discussed, in my opinion. Next slide, please. Now we're here to talk about TFA and pesticides and TFA hotspots. So this is a map of the TFA applied over Europe based on a recent study. Two of the major precursors that they were talking about of TFA are flufonastat, oxyfluorphin, but there are many other TFA pesticides. But this is one of the major sources of TFA, especially in, I say, our plant-based diets. Next slide, please. And one thing I also want to make clear, like there are these multiple sources of TFA. Like pesticides, there's also pharmaceuticals, there's these refrigerants, but there is really no way that we can clean them from our water. We might hear from this later from EurEau, but if you use granulated activated carbon, TFA will go right through it. If it can go up a plant, it can go through activated carbon. Ion exchange resins are not that efficient for TFA. Only the cutting edge ones are that are not in mass use. Ozonation, these types of processes, that was the type of mechanism that can convert a PFAS pesticide to a TFA or a pharmaceutical. The only option that we have is reverse osmosis, which is the same process that you use to desalinate drinking water. And this is very expensive. And maybe we can go more into that on the next slide. In collaboration with the Forever Pollution Project, we try to do an estimate of how much it would cost to decontaminate soil and water throughout Europe to try to remove things like TFA from the water supply. And from our estimates, this would be 100 billion euros per year. This would be a combination of using reverse osmosis and then some high energy technology to actually destroy the TFA, because there are some regions in Europe that are using reverse osmosis, but they're throwing their TFA into the ocean. They're not destroying it. So this needs to be destroyed, which costs more money. And this would make our drinking water expensive, no longer mineral. It would lose its natural quality. And even if we were to pay this 100 billion euros, we're still just talking about the TFA in the drinking water. Next, please. We're still going to have TFA in our wine. That's not going to solve that problem. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about, we have these sources and we have these recipients of irreversible accumulation. And so now I want to move into an effects and why we can be worried about this. Next slide, please. So the first is a very central study in a lot of these discussions, and that's from the Dutch authorities at the RIVM. And just briefly, what this is doing is comparing the relative potency of TFA with other PFAS. What those curves mean is that when it goes up, that means the thickness of a rat liver is increasing with a dose, which is on your x-axis. But what they say from the Dutch authorities, next slide, please. I'll just say this, that it is about 0.2% as toxic as PFOA, which is quite highly regulated in Europe. And so they come up with a limit of water threshold of 2.2 micrograms per liter. I said earlier that the German mean was 1.5 micrograms per liter. We're quite used to it, and we have to, we're already there. We're already there at this level that the Dutch consider a risk, and that is just the median. There are many regions in Europe that have much higher concentrations than 2.2 micrograms per liter. Another study is this one that was on Wistar rabbits, which looked at the reproductive toxicity in rabbits, and they found that the offspring of rabbits exposed to TFA did not have normal eye development. So it was referring to that, and so this is currently being discussed by ECHA if this warrants classification as a reproductive toxicant. So these are two major reasons to be worried about that for mammals. Next slide, please. I would also like to talk about like the ecological toxicity, because it's not only mammals that are being exposed to it. This is increasing in every environmental media we can measure. And so from the ecotoxicological point of view, they know it's toxic to some species of algae, and that has caused values that are considered safe of about 120 micrograms per liter. But when you take an assessment factor that considers we do not measure every algae out there, you can have limits that are considered safe in the literature as low as 0.12 or 12 micrograms per liter, which is the level that we already have now as our concentrations in Europe. So we're already at these threshold concentrations. And we have to consider that there are TFA hotspots everywhere. So we have to take this with a good degree of precaution. The next slide, please. Now, I also, since we're talking about pesticides, we also have to talk about soil health. There was a study that showed that there can be impacts on soil health at concentrations as low as 0.83 micrograms per kilograms per soil. So when we're talking about PFAS pesticides, a lot of them will degrade to TFA in the soil. And this has had soil effects like affecting the soil pH, the microbial respiration, bacterial abundance, and the litter decomposition, such as how quickly leaves or other debris will be converted to the soil. These processes all slow down when there's high levels of TFA. And these are levels that we also see around TFA hotspots. So we can also see the use of PFAS pesticides as potentially affecting, or could be affecting, the soil health over the long term in Europe. And there should be more studies on this. Next slide, please. So this is why altogether, I have concluded in this recent paper with my colleagues that TFA poses a potential boundary threat. Now, you can look at that red line as, say, the best case scenario where we have our TFA emissions and we decide to ban them today so that they go down, which is what we want. But the impacts that we already have will continue to increase because there'll still be TFA stockpiles around. And so we can only slow down the curve by banning now. These will be realized for generations. And there's three criteria of a planetary boundary threat. Next, please. The first is that, and next in a lot of animations, the first is that it disrupts a vital Earth system processes of which we are ignorant. I already gave you indications that we do know of some Earth system processes, such like soil health, where we have data on. So we do have proof that there could be these vital Earth system processes that could be disrupted by TFA. Next, please. The second was, once these effects are discovered, they'll be occurring at a global scale. This is a globally distributed pollutant. It certainly will be realized at a global scale. And the third condition, please. This is what I said earlier, that even if we start banning the substance now and depleting our stockpiles, we do anticipate that these impacts that are currently being experienced will be occurring for the near future and the far future. Next slide. So this is my final slide with my conclusions. So the solution to the global threat of TFA is that we have to, as part of this transition to PFAS-free pesticides before these irreversible impacts occur or become worse than they already are, we should better understand the irreversible impacts of TFA on soil, on plants, on microbes, and humans. So this is also a call for more research on that, so we can better prepare ourselves for these impacts. And in addition to banning, we should also safely dispose existing stockpiles of PFAS pesticides so they don't end up in the black market and exported overseas. They should be destroyed in addition to being banned. And that's it. Next slide. And I'd just like to thank you for your attention. And this is the article if you want to read more information about what I presented. And I also have to acknowledge my funding from the European Commission of the Zero PM project. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. It's very sobering, very comprehensive, a lot of detail there, but thank you very much for that presentation. Also a very good excuse to drink nice old aged wine. So I think I'll use that going forward. So that's the only silver lining I hear there. Thank you. Any questions? Remember, keep in mind that there will be opportunities to ask questions to our speakers at the end of the session. So thank you. But now I will pass to the next speaker, and that is Dr. Helena Banning, who is a scientific associate at the German Federal Environmental Agency, where she focuses on groundwater protection, pesticide metabolites, PFAS and TFA, and she's also been instrumental in making a case to the European Chemicals Agency. So I pass you the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and to share our data, our knowledge on the TFA. At the UBA, we work with the topic of TFA I think it's several years now, about the different sources of TFA, especially the pesticides. And I'm happy to share this knowledge with you today and also share a personal story, how I was thrown into the topic. So this is very well German focused, but of course at the end I will try to learn some lessons from it, what we can do and how we can get these levels of TFA down in the future. Next slide, please. So how it started in Germany. So there was once a PhD student in 2016 who accidentally found TFA in very high levels in the Neckar region in southern Germany. And it was around 20 microgram per liters in the drinking water. It was even more in the river water. And then everyone was thinking, what about it? So what is it? Where does it come from? The next slide, please. There were a lot of newspaper articles. I don't know if you follow the German news, probably not exactly, but there was like a big call, what to do, where is the origin, how can we proceed, what does it mean to us, to our health and the environment. The origin of this particular case was a big industrial plant producing fluorochemicals. And this plant was exactly at the place where we found these big concentrations. But this did not have anything to do with my work so far, because I work in the pesticide regulation. But then it came to my work 1 year later. Next slide, please. I was involved in the renewal of flufenacid. And then I looked into the data and found, okay, there is this CCF3 moiety in the molecule. And from this moiety, TFA is formed. Okay, very interesting. TFA, I know this one. It's the same from the industrial plant. Okay. And then I remembered there is another one, flutamone, where also TFA was formed from this CCF3 moiety. And then I was thinking, is there something more behind this? Maybe more substances? Next slide, please. And I found a lot of substances with CCF3 moieties on it. And I thought, okay, there is something serious going on. So we have to dig deeper into it. And that's when we started a working group at UBA from different sections, from the refrigerant section, the industrial section, our section, pharmaceuticals, and so on. And we collected all the data we have so far. Next slide, please. We find out TFA, definitely an emerging contaminant in Germany. If you look at the upper graph, you see refrigerants, and the sales rates in Germany for refrigerants that potentially form TFA is clearly rising. And unfortunately, the lower light green one is the one who produces the most TFA. So it's rising. It's really an emerging issue here for the refrigerants. Also, I talked about the industrial emissions before, this big plant with the big TFA concentrations in the groundwater and river water. Pesticides, of course, an issue. The lower graph shows the PFAS pesticides in Germany, the sales rates, how they are rising. So this is also an emerging issue. We heard about this before. It's also applying for Europe. And there are more potential sources: organic fertilizer, pharmaceuticals, maybe even more PFAS in other areas. We don't know. And one open question that was very emerging was that the contaminations we found in Germany, the very high levels of contamination in the waters, we didn't know what exactly is the reason for this. That is why we started a research project to look at it deeper on a local level. Next slide, please. I will try to make it really short to provide our results in this research project. So we located the potential sources and tried to estimate the TFA emissions. Of course, we have lacks of data in some cases, but we did our best. So we located the fluorochemical industry locations where the plants are located. We estimated the agricultural pesticide, the TFA from it, the organic fertilizer, the wastewater, which represents the pharmaceuticals, mainly the precipitation, whereas the refrigerants are coming through the precipitation. And then we matched it with the monitoring data we have. Next slide, please. I hope you can recognize something. The monitoring in the surface water and in the groundwater aggregated on the water body level. And then we matched it, and there was a very interesting map coming out of it. Next slide, please. This one. So you see the main TFA source in Germany, depending on the location, on the county level. You see some red counties, around 5 or something. This is where the big industry is. You see some blue ones. It's the big cities where the wastewater plays a role. But what you see most in the majority of cases is green. This is pesticides. So it means that, like in the areas, pesticides definitely is the major source of TFA for the contamination we have in Germany. And this means, okay, it's good. Today we are talking about pesticides. And for me, it means I and my job have to focus more on this and try to regulate it even better. So how is it even regulated? I will give a short overview on this. Next slide, please. So it was before 2016 until 2024 that TFA was considered a non-relevant metabolite for pesticides. The non-relevant metabolites, so-called, they have a guide value of 10 microgram per liter. It's no legal limit. It's quite weak. But we in Germany use it for pesticide authorization to account for the persistence and for, that this is a chemical that we don't want to have here. We try to implement it in risk mitigation measures in Germany for flufanacid product, but we failed. This is also an interesting story. I keep it short. We were sued by applicants, and then a court decided against us. So we couldn't even manage 10 microgram per liter, which is really sad. But then something happened. Next slide, please. 2024, there was some data coming up even before, but then a new proposal, a new dossier was submitted by us and by the BFR. This is our partner authority for human health, for a new CLH classification. A VP-VM, very persistent, very mobile. Of course, TFA is the candidate for this, but also reproductive properties 1B, which is from the BFR. And at the same time, the TFA task force by the fluorochemistry companies, they proposed a self-classification as reproducts 2. Both of these categories for reproduction toxicity lead to TFA being a relevant metabolite. And this does mean that we have to apply it as a relevant metabolite for pesticide authorization based on Sanke 221/2000, which has a hazard-based approach, which is very important, especially for substances like TFA, for very persistent ones that rise in their levels that we already see. Next slide, please. What does it mean? For the authorizations and approval, we have to use the legal limit value of 0.1 here. So it's getting stronger, the possibility to regulate these substances. And it also means that it requires more attention from the authorities who are responsible for this. And also that it has to be shown that TFA is not formed. I underlined it here because I would like to stress that the CCF3 moieties in the molecule, it is already an indication that TFA can be formed. So it is not our duty to prove that it is formed. It's the duty of the companies to prove that it is not formed. And we have to discuss how we can implement this. Next slide, please. So a short overview of what data we have per substance. So it is our state of knowledge. EFSA is here already, so maybe they have a new state of knowledge here. So these are the substances that are approved that potentially form TFA. We have a good databases for 3 of them. We have a solid databases for some more for other studies. Next slide, please. Next slide. For most of the substances, we don't have sufficient data to see if TFA is formed and to which amount and formation fraction is it formed. So we have a really big data gap here. And you may wonder, how can that be that we have such a data gap for approved substances? Well, it depends on the studies behind it. Next slide, please. So we have standard data requirement for soil degradation, what we need for groundwater risk assessment. And this is called the OECD 307 study design. And this is a good study design, but it's not suitable for TFA at all, to be honest, because it's very short. The studies are 120 days usually. I brought like a degradation metabolism scheme at the one side. You can see that an active substance is degraded into a metabolite and then another metabolite and then maybe another one. And then at the very end, you get TFA. It takes time. 120 days, it's not really much. So maybe you have to prolong these studies. Another thing is radioactive labeling. So radioactive labeling is a method we use to follow which metabolites will form during degradation. And if the label is not in the right place of the molecule, we cannot detect TFA. It's just not possible. So you have to have a look, is the label in the right place? For many studies, it's not. It's just not possible to detect TFA. And also it's difficult to identify a molecule as TFA because the analysis behind it, it's very difficult. If you use chromatographic methods, the tiny molecule, very mobile, it's really difficult to catch this, so to say. So it means that if TFA is not found in the studies, it definitely does not mean that it is not formed. So what can we do? Next slide. The last one. One approach is we did just as a study, we did a worst case modeling, assuming that the molecule forms TFA to 100%. And then we put it into our models that we usually use for the risk assessment for groundwater. And then we looked what came out. So if you're interested in the data, it's about to be submitted for publication. So you see that very many of these substances, I think the majority of them, they have TFA values that are really much above 0.1. But of course, this is a worst case approach. If this has to be refined, or we have to adapt the studies. I already told you that we have to make them a little bit longer, maybe the right labeling and so on. But we have to talk about how to implement it, what is like a reasonable way to do so. Next slide, please. So, okay, I'm finished here. I'm really happy about your attention and I'm open to questions. I put the links here for our publications on TFA, so you can have a look for yourself about the studies. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that presentation. And now I'd like to turn to our panel part of this session. And so let me introduce our panelists of today. I'd firstly like to introduce Dr. Manuela Tiramani, who is head of pesticides peer review unit for EFSA, so that's the European Food Safety Authority. There's also with us today Oliver Loebel, who is Secretary General of the European Federation of National Associations of Water Services, or EurEau. And I've already introduced Angeliki. Maybe I won't say your surname again. So I made such a horrible job last time. Angeliki, again, as a reminder, Head of Science and Policy at the Pesticide Action Network, Europe. So I would like to firstly... And Helmut, you're joining the panel as well. Okay, yeah, okay, great to have you with us today. Hello. That was okay, news to me. That's fine. I'll incorporate you in. Manuela, I'd like to come to you first. I think we made a nice link there, maybe at the end of Helena's presentation. I think it's maybe logical to come straight to you there. I think I'll come into maybe the details of where we're at in terms of the state of play of the PFAS pesticides a bit later on. But I think my first question for you is, listening to this and listening to the growing evidence of body over the last few years, why, in your view, do you think this issue went under the radar for as long as it has?
Interesting question, difficult to answer, but I think the first time we highlighted the presence of persistent metabolites, it was in 2008. There's a conclusion we did in 2008, and we highlighted the uncertainties, not really knowing how to progress. And then what you just mentioned, indeed, it's very relevant in the sense that in many cases, we don't see PFAS pesticides degrading into TFA, and the issue are the ones you clearly mentioned for all of us. Either you don't label the molecule in the right place, but more than this, in the view of our colleagues, is also that the time frame of the guidelines of OECD is not sufficient. And then when we simply ask, okay, let's do something different, it seems that there are also technical aspects really not allowing a proper identification. All this said, of course, has probably contributed to this, limbo situation. And this is where we are. I think I can also mention that on top of the work we are doing on TFA, maybe there's a chance later on to mention this. There's also a discussion with Commission on a dedicated work on the environmental part, due to many publications. Some of them were mentioned today. And so on top of the work on human health, there's a reflection rather concrete to go on with something on the environment, just to make the state of the art on top of what you all have done. Yeah.
All right, thank you for kicking us off there. Oliver, let me come to you now. Hopefully the presentation's somewhere in the works. Yeah, sorry. Your organization has come out strongly in arguing that there must be a PFAS phase out, that this is a prerequisite for a water resilient Europe. So perhaps you can talk us through why you say that. I understand you have a few slides that are on their way to kick us off.
Yes, I guess they are on the way. Yeah, yes. Thank you very much. And thank you very much also for the invitation to be here today. While the slides are put on the screen, I can already very briefly introduce who we are. So EurEau is the European Association of Drinking Water and Wastewater Operators. And through our 33 member countries, we basically supply the whole of Europe, also with drinking water. So you can go 2 slides on already, because this I have said. So the first statement I would make, it's not about confrontation. It's not about the good and the evil. It's about a problem that needs to be addressed and solved quickly, and the need to work together. All partners concerned, those who pollute, I would say, but also those who suffer from the pollution. So that's why I put cooperation first. So next slide, please. The second point for me is understanding. So what is the problem for our sector, for the drinking water sector for that matter? So next slide. Yeah, we've heard about TFA emissions, and now I use UBA data. Hopefully they are still correct. They are from 2020. And I think your organization in 2020 estimated that refrigerants and clothing agents are by far the biggest source of TFA to the environment, emission source of TFA to the environment. It was estimated, I think, at 2,400 tons. The second biggest emitter would be plant protection products, pesticides, here quantified at 460. But I guess these are estimates, but it shows that this is a very massive source. What we also see is that we do not have reliable data on all the sources. So there are a lot of estimates, but we do not know. So next slide. What is the situation for us, the drinking water suppliers today? First of all, TFA had not been regulated in the past because it was considered as less toxic. I would put it very bluntly in this way. In the drinking water directive that we are currently implementing, you have two possibilities, or member states have two possibilities to show compliance with pesticide limit values. One is 20 PFAS, the sum of 20 PFAS, 100 nanograms per liter. This does not include TFA. The other one is PFAS total, so all PFAS together, and there's a limit value of 500 nanograms per liter. This theoretically includes TFA, but Commission could not identify a reliable test method. All the methods we have, basically, they do not quantify TFA correctly. So we have today a bit, strange recommendation to say, well, we measure TFA separately, and if the TFA value is above PFAS total, then the test result is non-conclusive, which is very difficult for us. Also, most member states will use the 20 PFAS, sum of 20 PFAS. What changes do we expect in the future? The European Commission has asked the WHO, the World Health Organization, to propose health-based limit values for individual PFAS, including TFA. And this is very important because the one sum of 20 PFAS or PFAS total are purely administrative arbitrary limit values. They are not health-based. So this is a very important step. And we expect this to lead to a revision of the Drinking Water Directive 2027, 2028. I don't know, but it's in the pipeline, I guess. Next slide. What does it mean? What are the risks? First, on the left-hand side, you see what we have today. And there is a wide range of different recommendations for drinking water quality, TFA, ranging from 60 microgram per liter in Germany, a guidance value, Flanders, guidance value 18 microgram, Denmark, binding value of 9 microgram, and Netherlands and Wallonia, I think guidance value is 2.2 micrograms per liter. So very wide range, which makes life for us very difficult because we do not know what is the right one really. So we support the Commission in their effort to set a health-based EU-wide limit values. So what do we find in the raw drinking water, the water we abstract? Here, a very wide range depending on the source, and what I can say, very low. If you have deep aquifers, it can still be zero today. This will change. It can go to several hundreds of micrograms per liter in the worst case. Mostly, if I see the data we have just collected this year, would say between 50 nanograms or 0.05 micrograms and 0.7 micrograms. So this is what we mostly find, which means today drinking water would be compliant in most cases also with the lowest guidance values in Europe. But we know that this will change over the next years. Next slide. And also, I think we must be very clear, drinking water is not the only pathway. Here are some data for TFA in food. And the data we found are partially very much higher than we have in drinking water today. So we cannot just resolve the problem by adding unsustainable treatment to drinking water or raw drinking water. We need to address the full problem. And here I have to say farmers basically suffer from their own actions. And this is something that they have to know also that needs to change. So I come to the end. Next slide, which is basically taking action because we need action. Next slide, please. Yeah, very clearly we see, and Hans was also very clear on that, TFA concentrations are rapidly increasing in the environment, and they will continue to increase for the years to come. We are likely to move towards lower limit values for TFA to protect human health. TFA is very persistent, mobile, we heard that, and Hans has pointed it out already, with the technologies we have, we cannot remove it from raw drinking water. Reverse osmosis is simply not an option, also because it would increase water abstraction needs by 20 to 30%, and this water is simply not there today. And we had estimates of the costs through the Forever Pollution Project. This is for drinking water treatment alone. And we have many other sources of human uptake. So the only way forward very clearly is a complete ban of PFAS pesticides now, and of course of PFAS more widely. So this is our recommendation also for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I'd now like to come back to I did mention, Manuela, we'd come back to the state of play. So perhaps I can pass the floor to you now for more of an overview of kind of what's in the pipeline, what's coming. I understand you also have a couple of slides which are on the way. And I pass you the floor.
Okay, yeah, they are. Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the invitation. Very interesting discussion so far. I hope I can continue keeping the attention high. So the next one. So just to say that the field of pesticides is part of the remit of EFSA. So pesticides per se are regulated at European level with the role of EFSA, but in general, PFAS from many different sources are something that is dealt with by ECHA, meaning if they are biocides or if they are chemicals of general nature, and also for classification purposes. However, recently, let's say in 2023, the awareness of the PFAS metabolites increased a lot over the years, so that while probably deciding how to handle the issue, Commission asked us clearly to report in every conclusions that we are publishing the notion whether the chemical pesticide is a PFAS. And so you can see in the last almost 3 years, in our conclusion, the identification of whether the substance under discussion is a PFAS. And so you see the first cases, triflosulfuron and flutolanil and metabolites. So this is something formal that we have been doing, but let's move on to the next slide. And I think one of the points of discussion, of debate, and I would be glad then to have a chat with the colleagues with the expert who delivered the keynote speech, definition of what PFAS is. I think there's a general agreement on what the definition is. There's something in the OECD guidance, and then something that, again, in 2023, ECHA identified for the restrictions defined back then. And so basically is the at least one fully fluorinated methyl group or methylene carbon atom. So this is what we have used in all the work that I will present later on. So in the next slide, I'm not saying anything new. Those who were before me said it very well and very clear. So the concerns are the environment, human health, in terms of accumulation, human, animal, and plant health. And health effects. I have to say that even without a clear labeling as PFAS for our past conclusions, PFAS substances have been screened for all the endpoints, for instance, that you will see in the right-hand side, not very visible, but basically we always screen substances for their effects on reproduction, carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, endocrine disruptors. So in this sense, we could look at this, we always look at the substance in a global way, no matter if labeled as PFAS or not. We always do that. Of course, the point of PFAS is essential to think of what was mentioned before. Have we really seen it, or have we missed it because of designs of data not showing this? And I think in the next slide, there's something giving a bit of dimension. So far, and the list is not exhaustive, my colleagues in Parma, and we are working on this just to progress. But I can say that based on the structure only, and I go back to what Helena mentioned. So we have identified almost 140 PFAS substances, which is, I would say, a significant number. More or less, Helena presented the slide with all the structures. I have the numbers here. Out of this, but I hope that this can be, at least when I was preparing, I said, well, that's good. 60%, 71% of those are no longer approved in Europe. So again, I want to say that even in times where we are not focusing on PFAS as we are doing now, other health effects were identified, or effects in general, which made the substance out of the market because not meeting the requirement of 1107. But there's still 28% approved. And I also have to say that when it comes to the peer review process, for those of you who are not familiar, is the process where EFSA and member states peer review the draft risk assessment prepared by a member state. So there are many substances for which probably applicants gave up. I can assume this. It never started. And then we have some ongoing, a little percentage. 24% are finalized. 11% are in the intake phase. What does it mean intake phase? That the applicant has submitted a dossier to a member state. The member state has prepared the risk assessment, and now it's entering the EFSA process. Not yet the scientific one, but the intake phase. So this is the current situation. We try to update it with the latest numbers. In the next slide, you can see, for instance, that, again, numbers updated as much as possible. 59 PFAS underwent the peer review process, or are in the peer review process. And out of these 59, so not the ones I was mentioning before, the whole big group of 140, but the ones that currently, that we have seen ourselves, 66 were approved, 32% not approved, 2% still in between the phases of procedure. You see here some examples of substances, and for them you can see that, for instance, triflusulfuromethyl and berfluorine have not been approved. We have flutolanil, for which there's an authorization expiring soon. We have prepared our assessment. We see how the risk managers, we will finalize it. And tritosulfuron was approved, but last year the applicant withdrew the use, so no intention to continue using it. I gave just a few examples just to give a bit of a flavor of what we are doing. In the next slide, trifluoroacetic acid, already mentioned a lot today. I can tell you what we are doing. As I said, also we are discussing with Commission a more general mandate, not general, a mandate specifically on the environment. Here is what it triggered the mandate from Commission. I hope that Hans can acknowledge that I put in italics precursor of a natural occurring environment ? Because I just wanted to reflect the debate, but you have been very clear in saying no. But just to say that this is one of the frequently found narratives. So I decided to use the italic and the question mark. Surprisingly, I have to say, out of the 59 cases I was mentioned before, we have identified only 12 of these 59 PFAS able to produce TFA in residues, soil, groundwater. And this goes back exactly to what we were saying before, that maybe guidelines need to be reconsidered or something has to be done. And I suspect that the mandate we are discussing with Commission on environment will exactly focus on this specific aspect because, yeah, it has been unnoticed for some time. Just to say, and this is for all of you who are showing an interest in this topic, all our substances are put in public consultation. So anytime you have information, data, and you see one of these draft risk assessment in consultation, please, you're more than welcome to comment and say, look, this is something that you don't see because it was not correctly looked at. So the next slide, I can say what we are doing then in terms of mandate, the human health, let's call it this way, the environment is still to come. The human health is this one. So just a quick few points for history. In 2017, we used the best data package from a substance called fluortamone to set a sort of benchmark. So the most complete was that one, and that allowed us to identify an acceptable daily intake of 0.03 milligram per kilo body weight. Okay, now it's difficult to merge with the liters we have discussed so far, but that's something else we have to come for sure if we continue in this activity. But just to say that since then we try always to compare the quality of data received against this one. In 2021, Bayer contacted all the agencies, us included, saying that in the context of the REACH authorization, they were working on TFA and found out effects of concern, namely the ones that are now at the basis of the possible classification of TFA as reproductive toxicant. And so ECHA started working, and if we go to the next one, in 2023, end of 2023, Germany came up with a CLH proposal, and now this is undergoing the process in ECHA. Based on this, we were mandated also to reconsider the reference value, so the acceptable daily intake and the acute reference dose and also the acceptable operator exposure level, based on all the information submitted. We made a call for data. We ask, please, member states, give us all the data you have. Companies, have you sent anything to us? Yes. And now we are working at the mandate for reference values, and we expect it to be ready by the end of October 2025. And this is the big part of the work we are currently working on. Let's see if the reference value set so far, based on one of the best substances, best in terms of data availability, will remain the same or they will change. And then we will see from there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that overview. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions afterwards. But before that, let me turn to Helmut, who was my pleasant surprise joining the panel. So Helmut Burtscher-Schaden, I didn't introduce you properly. Sorry about that. It was a biochemist working with Global 2000 Friends of the Earth Austria. Going to talk a little bit about safety levels of TFA thresholds. I pass to you and then Angeliki.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. I would like to talk a bit about what we heard before, safety levels, also risk assessment on TFA, and some thoughts from a health perspective. We have heard from previous presentations, TFA is a toxicological, problematic and relevant forever chemical that is found everywhere, not only in water, also in plants, in agriculture products, in our blood, in concentrations even higher than all other PFAS put together. Based on this, we should derive two measures. First, to prevent further accumulation in the biosphere in the substances that release TFA, like PFAS pesticides and F gases, must be banned. My colleague will elaborate on that. And to protect public health, given the already existing amounts of PFA in food and water, we need safety limits. We need safe threshold levels and also a risk assessment. And it's good to hear that EFSA is working on that. But we are also a bit, there's some concern at the same time that and of course, we will be happy if at the end of the year, we see that all these concerns were unfounded. But when we look into past risk assessments, especially those relying solely on industry studies, there have been some risk assessments prone to errors, leading in some cases to toxicological misjudgments by orders of magnitude, only corrected years later. And one example is, for example, a PFAS, it's PFOA. A PFAS that is structurally, there are some slides that we have missed. PFA is structurally similar to TFA. It's from the same family. It's some kind of the bigger, meaner brother of TFA. And it's luckily, TFA is, to our best knowledge, not in any case so toxic as PFOA is, but it's not a harmless chemical, as we have seen. And in the next slide, the first figure, the left bar, represents PFOA's tolerable intake, as it was the relevant TDI, tolerable daily intake, until 2018, then deemed safe by EFSA. And the bar to the right shows the amount considered safe today. And if you are now asking which bar, the answer is the tolerable daily intake that is now assumed to be safe is so small that you cannot show it in this figure. And this demonstrates two things. On the one hand, how extremely toxic PFOA is, and on the other hand, how industry-sponsored studies failed to reveal the dangers of this PFAS. And PFOA has, among other things, next slide, please, immunotoxic, endocrine disrupting, carcinogenic, and reprotoxic properties, what led EFSA to revise, and this is very good, this was a very important step in a very scientific assessment, the total daily intake. So now we have something that we can work with. And this was due to an overwhelming body of evidence that came from published literature, from academic science. And for TFA, however, there is a big lack of such studies. Not least because it remained under the radar of regulatory attention and under the radar of monitoring. So when there is no data, then it's very difficult to do academic studies, epidemiologic studies, etc. Therefore, EFSA has only industry studies to derive the TDA, the same for WHO. And that is a poor starting point, all the more so as the data situation with industry studies is also extremely thin. And yeah, all the things we see here, we do have this reproductive study, but all the other endpoints to our knowledge are not covered by industry studies in the moment. And therefore, yeah, the question is, what does EFSA do? And this raises actually the question to, if with such a high degree of scientific uncertainty, and that's what we are talking about, if it's possible or how it's possible to do a proper risk assessment. And this would be the last slide. In the case of TFA, there are, and this is a beacon of hope, there are some interesting examples we heard about already of some from member state authorities on how to deal with a lack of substantial studies in the published literature. The Dutch authority, for example, took the most innovative approach, deriving a TDI based on the assumption that TFA behaves toxicologically like a PFAS. Using PFOA as a reference, they assumed TFA is a 500-fold, has a 500-fold lower potency due to the differences that they found in liver toxicity. So the TDI is 500 times higher than the TDI of PFOA. The Flemish Health Authority, it's the bar in the middle, followed a more conventional approach, but they applied, quote, an additional uncertainty factor of 10 for incomplete knowledge due to the lack of data on immunotoxicity, reproductive toxicity, and developmental toxicity, end of quote. So leading to a TDI of 2.6 microgram per kilogram body weight, which is far less than what we see on the right side. And this is the TDI that was established by EFSA in 2014 for the first time. In 2017, it was confirmed by EFSA with, I think, fluortamone. We heard about that. And this bar illustrates what is the result if you do a risk assessment based on very poor and few industry studies by not looking into what you do not know. There are rules for this. ECHA has guidelines how to deal with a risk, also the WHO. So you have to include more risk factors or take a different approach. And we hope that at the end of the year, we can see that EFSA came out with a health-based guidance value with a TDI that is truly protective. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And last but certainly not least, Angeliki, I come to you for your slides.
Just ask for clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Helmut, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think you mentioned TDI, but in pesticides, we never said TDI. Are you referring maybe to the opinion of the content panel on PFOA? Because I cannot find myself just to say that as pesticide, we have never dealt with PFOA per se. Yeah, it's very likely the opinion of the content panel. Just to let you know that there's also a line. There's also.
No, I talked about EFSA. I didn't talk about only the pesticide unit.
No, I wanted to make it clear because there's a difference. And just to say that the opinion of the content panel heavily relies on published data. Just to be clear that there are there's not an applicant behind. There are biomonitoring data, literature data, just for clarity, whereas maybe the narrative of the industry studies applies mainly to pesticide, even has changed. But the content was really based on a published study. Thank you. Just to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you. And Vicky.
Yes, thank you. So as a final presentation, maybe it's going to be, I'm going to recap some of the things that we discussed today and also look at the future and how we're going to ban PFAS pesticides. Next, please. So it's true that in pan-Europe we became aware of PFAS pesticides because of the global restriction on PFAS that excluded pesticides, because they said that these are properly regulated and they will be banned soon. But we found that this was not the case. So, so it's good that now EFSA is explaining that this is specifically a PFAS pesticides when they do the assessment. So currently, as I said, we have 32. I have included flufenacet that was recently non-renewed, and only 10 have been flagged as candidates for substitution. I'm not going to go into detail, but this is when we know that there are some kind of hazardous properties, but not enough to ban them, but yes, to substitute them. Obviously, these have not been substituted. So what we also know is that all of them contain the CF3 moiety, as we saw by Helena. And so they are potential TFA emitters. And we know that in the assessment that's done by the industry, so the industry dossiers, the studies are many times missing or on the TFA degradation or the degradation of PFAS pesticides that they will give rise to TFA, or they're not done properly. This doesn't mean that we cannot ban the substances one by one, because we also have the precautionary principle, but we actually have very clear data. Please go ahead. So the EU pesticide regulation, it's very clear, and it says that pesticide residues should have no harmful effects to human, environment, and groundwater. And for this, we have a precautionary value, which means that active substances and relevant metabolites, as we heard, they cannot be detected above 0.1 microgram per liter. This means that if there is such residues in groundwater, then the pesticide cannot be authorized, or it must be banned. And next one. So we know that there are data gaps for TFA, but we already know that it's toxic. So we don't need additional data to ban it, because of this rabbit study that we heard before. It is a relevant metabolite, and therefore all PFAS pesticides can now be phased out or banned. And here I'm just providing the legal ground on how we can do that. The ones that we heard that they're already going through a renewal application, they shouldn't be renewed. But of course, the ones that they are in the market and they're not reviewed yet, they can already be withdrawn by triggering what we know as an Article 21. Now, while this is happening at EU level, member states can also take action at national level. So here we provide the two articles that they can trigger banning of all products that they contain PFAS pesticides. So thanks. Yes, so also coming to the wording that we're using for the PFAS restriction generally, PFAS pesticides should be banned because, first of all, they're not essential. So why I'm saying it's not essential, we said 32, we have many active substances, so we actually have alternative chemical substances, but what's interested for us is that you also have several non-chemical alternatives. And here we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have in place a directive, there is the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive, and it says that pesticides have to be used as a last resort. So you have to try all other methods before you use a chemical pesticide. And we have to finally move away. I mean, we have rediscussing, but we have to do it also through this parliament to move away from the current intensive agricultural model And here we bring something that is already should be implemented since 2014, that all member states have to implement true, real integrated pest management, where you use only pesticides as a last resort. We need to boost organic agriculture and methods based on agroecology. And of course, we need to support the farmers in this transition to become more, let's say, chemical free. And this should happen through CAP. This is a common agricultural policy. And as we're not right now in the discussions of water, we have the Water Framework Directive that is being discussed, but also recently the Water Resilience Strategy. We need to endorse and put measures to reduce the pesticide use and the impact they have on the water resources through the discussions that are taking place right now. And with that, I'm thinking I'm going to end the presentation so we can have a few minutes for discussion. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. And as Angelique said, we do now have a few minutes for questions. But just before I do open the floor for questions, I would like to pass the floor to Pernille Weiss-Eilher, who I understand you'd like to take the floor to have a few words. Pernille is a member of the cabinet of Commissioner Jeske Roswell, responsible for environment, water resilience and competitive circular economy. I understand you have a few thoughts you'd like to share.
Yes, thank you. I've been a member of the cabinet 2 weeks and 2.5 days. I'm the so-called water resilience expert in the cabinet, working with zero pollution, and also the now mentioned water resilience strategy. And that is why I'm here today. To listen, and I appreciate very much all the research-based facts, as well as also the interventions coming from EurEau and from EFSA. So I'm all ears to the debate, and I will follow this here closely. Also, what I will follow in the future together with the Commissioner, because you have already, I hope, seen her positions in the media, that she's very concerned about the PFAS challenge, and she's open for bans on PFAS that goes to agriculture and goes to people. But we also have an issue with PFAS where it is not to be replaced at the moment. So I also strongly appreciate that I hear more research and innovation is needed. But also that we should look closer into how we can research and innovate on technologies that can help us to take out PFAS and other substances in our environment that is hazardous for environment, of course, but also in especially for health. So this will not be the last time that I will be ears, and hopefully also when you can see the water resilience strategy when we present it, hopefully before the end of this first half year of 25, you can see signs of signals of how we're going to approach the PFAS question. So thank you so much for allowing me to present myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Thank you. I'd now like to open the floor to questions. We have a few minutes for questions. Anybody like to put a question to any of our speakers, including the first keynote presentations? Don't all jump at once. Oh no, there is a question there. Yes, I'll pass you the floor. If you could just quickly introduce yourself before your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Erigal from eFarm Organics Europe, so I represent organic farmers in particular. Well, thank you for saying that the use of PFAS is not essential in agriculture. And the good news is that we can produce food without synthetic chemicals. To keep the question short, I'm wondering if it would make sense to go beyond the ban of individual substances or categories, specific categories like PFAS. We know that across Europe, many water agencies, like in France, are actively promoting the development of organic agriculture in water catchment areas. Could we expect the water resilience strategy, for example, or other type of actions to ban all synthetic pesticides from water catchment areas, to take a more precautionary approach and go beyond this ban of individual substances? And it's a question addressed to all the speakers as well. Thank you.
Okay, who would like to come in on this point? Would you like to come in? Yeah.
I just want to add to the complexity and maybe the possibilities in the future that we will also see from the Commissioner Rosmel the Bioeconomy Act, so that pesticides and what is chemistry can be replaced by biosolutions, where we need something to make our crops more stable against climate adaptation. Too much water, too less water, changes in our climate. So we also, interested in both evidence and research and innovation that goes in that direction, because the Bioeconomy Act is at least where we hear that there are voices saying there are alternatives if we cannot go 100% organic in the future, when we also have the demand issue to address. So that's also an invitation to send what you have of evidence and inspiration for that work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice, good invitation. Thank you. Oliver, did you want to also come in on this point?
Just a very short reaction. We find a lot of metabolites and pesticides in groundwater resources in our catchment area. So, of course, that's a measure that we would wholeheartedly support, as you can imagine. There may be scope for some compromise, but as a starting point, I think it's the right approach to protect our water resources in the long run. I would fully agree.
Yes, just to add here that I fully agree. And of course, going substance by substance, many times we are missing things. We cannot follow everything. But with what we've seen, we see like currently we have at least 95 active substances that are toxic to aquatic organisms with long-lasting effects. So this is a big question, like why we continue using them. And it's a pity we don't have DG Sante with us today, because I think this is a question that they will be able to answer. Why this bottleneck to move finally, to do this transition that we need to protect our water from pesticide substances? Thank you.
Yes, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I would like to come in, but something related, but not exactly on this topic. But I mean, I've been to other meetings where we talked about the essentiality of PFAS in different sectors. And I think this type of conversation applies here, because in some of the replacements for PFAS, we already have the technological answer. Like we might have a replacement organic pesticide for a PFAS pesticide. But then there's the question of how do you actually convince the market to transition? And it's always a question of what kind of carrots and sticks do you need? Sometimes the idea is floated of introducing a tax for those that do not phase out the PFAS from product X to help fund other initiatives that would introduce the alternatives, because it has to be in everybody's interest that this is happening. Even so, as it just says, how do you translate? We have the technological solution; it has been innovated. How do you help bring that to, or accelerate that to market? That's a question. I'll have that as a question. How?
Yeah, how? I was about to follow on and say yes. How? Any ideas? Anybody have any ideas on this? If any of the speakers would like to pick up on this point, Oliver, yeah.
That's the $1 million question, of course. No, it's euros.
Or the 100 million.
But very clearly, as you have pointed out yourself in the beginning, the societal costs of PFAS is tremendous. And DG Environment are doing a study currently also to determine these costs. The Forever Pollution Project has determined or well calculated the costs, I have to say. Tremendous work being done there. So these costs cannot fall upon consumers, taxpayers, public authorities. They must be borne by those, and I'm very blunt, who make benefits by putting these products and substances on the market. I think that's a very important starting point to integrate, to pass on these environmental and health costs to the people using or putting PFAS on the market, which would make those products more expensive, but substitutes more competitive, and that's what we need. And what we also need is regulatory clarity. I mean, I'm attending these meetings in ECHA, Risk Assessment Committee, Social and Economic Analysis Committee. We have a lot of companies, European producers, waiting for regulatory clarity, saying, well, these substances will be banned within this timeline. But today, there is no clarity. We will have to wait until, let's say, 2030, perhaps, until the Commission proposes a PFAS ban. We do not know what the transition periods will be. As long as this is not clear, there is no market for the newcomers. And this is really a pity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We do have a question over here, and we're running out of time, so I'd like to come over here. Yes, quickly introduce yourself.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Sarah Johansson from the European Environmental Bureau. Thank you for all your very interesting interventions. I wanted to pick up on the points that Angeliki mentioned, and some of the other colleagues also talked about groundwater. I mean, this is where we get our drinking water from, either from groundwater or surface water. And it's over 2 years ago now that the Commission proposed new thresholds for new pollutants in surface and groundwater, including for PFAS. It's now in institutional dialogue, but this file is really dragging on. And meanwhile, these substances are unregulated in surface and groundwater. Oliver mentioned that we are getting, the member states have to comply by 2026 with PFAS thresholds, although they might not be health-based. So just to invite on a reflection on regulating pollutants, including TFA and PFAS in drinking water, and in regulating it in natural waters.
Thank you. Anybody like to jump in on this point? Yes.
I don't want to
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think this might be
I'm sorry, I'm speaking. One comment on that one. We have diverging positions here between Commission on the one side, Commission and Parliament on the one side, and the member states on the other side. So Commission and Parliament are both proposing this 4.4 nanograms for the sum of 24 PFAS expressed in before equivalents. It's out. Whereas member states want to move to 100 nanograms for the sum of 20 PFAS. So the same limit value as in the Drinking Water Directive, which puts us in a terrible situation if this became reality, because then the maximum value that we can have in drinking water would already be authorized into groundwater and our sources. And we know once the groundwater is polluted, it will take decades to clean it up again. So, and we know that the limit values for drinking water will go down over the next years. But if we get these 100 nanograms for groundwater, we'll run into real trouble. So I can only encourage Parliament to stick to its arms and maintain the level of 4.4 nanograms. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. When you mentioned the Parliament there, and I think that was a nice segue into our closing remarks. I'm afraid, I'm sorry. I'm afraid the clock is ticking and we're just out of time. So I'll have to move to the closing remarks of the. Do you have if it's a very short intervention, I'll allow it very quickly.
Yes, I would like to correct an information. Eduardo from the Belgian delegation of the Council. The Council text introduced flexible linkage to the drinking water. So we didn't change it permanently. We wait for the drinking water to be adapted, and then automatically it would reflect on the priority substances text. So we want an alignment between the two texts, because as it's been proposed, it's not acceptable for the member states to have different values in the two texts. That's to be clear. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Just to say, if there are any other extra points, questions, thoughts that you'd like to share on this, I think all of the panelists, don't speak for everyone, are very happy very open to this. So if anyone wants to add to this, you can send afterwards any of your extra thoughts or reflections. But now I really do have to close it. Thank you very much to all of our panelists, and I would like to pass the final word to Cristina.
Thank you very much. It's very a pleasure to meet you here, and you don't know how deeply moved I am to see this room full of key players in the fight to protect health and the environment from PFAS. Why? Because I come from a very polluted area, because I am a farmer myself, and because in the last 10 years I worked hard on this theme as a member of the regional council of Veneto region that you maybe heard as one of the most PFAS polluted areas in Europe. So more than 400,000 people are hardly contaminated, also myself and my family, and the economic and health costs on our lives are sadly very visible. So my No PFAS community has a goal. No one should ever have to experience the abandonment and fear that we have been and we are experiencing today. This is why it is so important for us to have created this network, thanks to PAN, to intervene with knowledge and scientific support to protect not only the environment of today and tomorrow from TFA and PFAS, but also human health, especially that of farmers. For this reason, we have written a letter to the Commission asking to intervene by stopping the use of all 34 pesticides that certainly generate the presence of TFA. And we did it together with my colleague and supported by other 50 European members of the EU Parliament, a support that really gave me a big bunch of hope. And today we are talking about pesticide, but that is the first necessary step in protecting the quality of food, environment, and health. But this knowledge you shared with us today will also help us to work on other issues. For example, the research of alternatives, the protection of natural resources from industrial waste and emission, and strategy also to protect agricultural, food, and health from historical pollution. Sigrid Friis and I have a lot in common. We are new members of this parliament. We come from areas deeply polluted by PFAS, but we are also new mothers, aware that we and our children are victims of a contamination, aware of how urgent it is to defend the generations of today and tomorrow from any source of PFAS contamination. This human awareness is our strength, and we will use it so that no one else has to suffer as we are suffering today. So thank you very much for your work, and we are going to share the path together in the next few years. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, that brings today's event to a close. This has been a pleasure to moderate. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thank you to the hosts of today's event, and thank you to all of you for your contributions. I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you very much.